Hi everybody, this is Diane. I am here to show you the final two shoe journals that I've been working on. I already sold the vintage ones and now we have the more modern ones. And I love these with this really fun fabric that I put on the covers. This is a one signature journal and the other one is 3 signatures. And I used a file folder for the base and I just covered it with this fabric and added this sheer ribbon to tie it and put a vintage pink plastic buckle that somebody sent me in a Happy Mail and some vintage lace along the edge. The colors on the fabric are pink and gold and black, as you can see. So I used those colors throughout, and also I added some teal, or turquoise I mean, and then whatever colors were in the shoe images that I included. On the inside there is some fabric, pink polka dot fabric, reinforcing the spine, and then some cardstock, patterned cardstock on the end paper. This is from the book jacket of one of the books that I got images from, and it was called Where Will This Shoe Take You?, which I thought was a great title. I just backed that image with a cardstock grid pattern, and you can write on that. This is a leftover piece of digital paper that I had from another project, and I thought it went well. I did use a lot of florals for journal cards and things like that. And I also used some wallpaper digitals from TaylorMade Journals and Amity Bloom for some digital pages in here. I did some stenciling on the backs of the digital papers. I have a couple of shoe stamps, so I used them. And I added some lace. Now, this is copy paper, and I didn't want to use coffee dye on it. I didn't want to use coffee on it. So I actually put some warm water in the pan that I use for coffee dyeing, and I added some of the craft paint and let it kind of mix in there. It came out very, very pale, and then I put my fingers in the paint, in the water, and just sprinkled it over the paper to add a little more color. So you'll see some spots and streaks. And then I ironed the paper so it wasn't so crumply, but it is still a little bit, which is what I wanted. I wanted it to have some texture and a little bit of tinting to it. I would have liked it if it was a little darker, but that's okay. And this just came from the Mrs. Coggs images. I did not use her images because I used all of them in the vintage journal, but I took the words off of the papers and used them. There's some fabric back there. This is a shoe. Somebody sent me in a Happy Mail recently some cutout shoes that were already backed onto cardboard. So I used some in the other journals, and I used the last of them in these journals. I love this pink one. So it's a little tuck spot, and I added this bridge tally card, which I also got in a Happy Mail a while ago. I got this one, and I love those shoes. This is one of the wallpaper. I don't know, that might be from TLC Creates Vintage. I've had that one for a long time, and I had printed something on the back of it. Just used a stamp there. This came from a book that I have about a fashion museum that's in Japan. It has some really, really gorgeous images in that book. And I like the shoe images. On the back of it is an outfit with no shoes shown. So I added this vintage little notebook paper and a quote out of the Where Will This Shoe Take You book, and a Tim Holtz floral die cut there. This says, the millions of new shoe ideas that appear on the market are based on 7 old, and occasionally very ancient, shoe styles: the sandal, boot, Oxford, pump, clog, mule, and moccasin. Where will these shoes take you? Anywhere in the world you wish. There's some vintage wrapping paper here. I made some flips using the fabric that I put on the cover and some black polka dot fabric. And I actually looked specifically for some fabric that I could use. I don't usually have to do that. I needed some fabric for the spine on this book, So I got a fat quarter of this black polka dot, and then put it on the spine and used the rest to make fabric flips. This is the blue paper. I added more paint, the color came out better, and then it just kind of pooled on the paper, and I thought it looked really, really cool. There's Dorothy's Ruby Slippers, and I used the words shoes and magic from the book. And there's another stamp with the ruby slippers. And there's a picture of Dorothy with her ruby slippers on. In the book, they're silver, but silver didn't show up in the movies, so they used red. And here's a quote from The Wizard of Oz about clapping the heels of her shoes together. This is a wallpaper, I think. Or no, it's just a vintage, it's just a rose pattern paper. And I printed it on tracing paper. I've had that in my stash for a long time. This is Ledger from the 1930s. This is the pink paper, pink dyed. It's very, very, very pale. It doesn't even look pink in the camera, but you can see little bits of swirls of pink here. And I used this gold trim to kind of bring out the gold that's on the fabric. This came out of one of my antique magazines, or vintage magazines. So it is an actual piece from the magazine. And up here it says, "Where will this shoe take you?" Piece of stationery here. This is TLC Creates vintage paper. And I just used a scrap of pink cardstock and stenciled on it, added some ribbon, and this cut out from an old book that I have about fashion. This is a stamp that I have. It's a Tim Holtz stamp and a little journaling card that's a digital from Nostalgia Graphic Land. Look at that beautiful blue. In the center is an envelope that I have to glue. Didn't realize that I forgot to do that, but it's a pretty pink gingham envelope, and I put a little die cut butterfly there. And this card that I made with a dictionary image from a children's book about shoes. You can journal on this card. And I will glue that envelope shut. On the back of the envelope was this label that's printed right on. And I just added a piece of fabric and an image from that book, about old book that I have about fashion. Here is a shoe that I made out of a paper clip. This came out of a 1969 Montgomery Ward catalog. Or I don't know if it was the Spiegel one or the Ward's one that I have. But I just made it into a paper clip. And I added some index cards to some of the dye bath that I had with the paint, and then I cut this out of an old magazine advertisement. Comes out darker on this page. Just a little fabric collage here, some fabric and lace, and then I kind of fussy cut this rose out of that piece of fabric scrap. And then this came out of a vintage magazine, and I added a digital postcard. This is a scrap of Graphic 45 paper, and I added a label to it. And a digital guest check. I made a tag out of a vintage ad, and a shipping tag. I'll have to put some, let's do it right now before I forget, piece of seam binding in there. Okay, that's done. And then I also added a few little tags to the dye bath, so that's blue. This is just a flashcard of a shoe. And there's a little journaling spot there and a postcard. Here's the other shoe stamp that I have. This is a piece of fabric and the word shoes from one of my books. And then there's a pocket on the back too, and This is an ad from a vintage magazine. You can see through it to the ad that's behind it, but I backed it with some grid paper so you can journal. So I'm just going to list this as one signature shoe journal. This is the 3 signature shoe journal using the same fabric, but I covered a hardback book with it, just had a plain cover, and I used the black polka dot fabric. I sewed in the 3 signatures with black cord, and I put this sequin trim along the edge of the spine. I put some eyelets in the edge of the front and the back and added seam binding to tie it closed. And the black polka dot fabric wraps around to the inside, and then we have some roses for the end paper, just scrapbook paper. So here we have Amity Bloom wallpaper and some lace. I again did stenciling. There's a lot of the same elements in this book. That's one of the shoes. I don't know if that, I think I made that one. It came out of one of my books. And tally card again. And a vintage magazine ad. A whole page of it. This is a little poem. When I am walking, it's called New Shoes. When I am walking down the street, I do so like to watch my feet. Perhaps you do not know the news. Mother has bought me fine new shoes. When the left one steps, I do not speak. I listen to its happy squeak. So that came out of a children's book. Vintage notebook paper and digital flower there, and some washi tape. There's the wrapping paper, and this is a vintage piece from my antique catalog. Again, we have the fabric flips and the same colored papers. And this is the ruby slippers on the stamp. It's one of my stamps. And I glued on the words, "Where will this shoe take you?" It took her back home. This came out of a book about your style. It asked you questions to help you determine your style, and then it showed different clothing for different parts of your life that would suit your style. And this was a page about shoes if you're a classic elegant. There's that 1930s ledger paper. This is the border stamp I used on whenever I used a border stamp, it was that one. Vintage advertisement here. And a rose postcard digital. Stationery. And I used these envelopes that had the gold foiling on them. They're vellum envelopes because of the gold on the fabric. And then I had this postcard, just a reprint of the Gold Cross shoes. It goes in there. There's some antique or vintage trim here. There's another shoe and a journaling card. And there's a paper clip right there and an index card there. Inside this pocket is a digital library card. This came out of one of my books. It's a cowboy boot. And I backed it so that you can write on it, and then a little tag. This is interesting. If you don't like the picture of the bones of the foot, you can cover that up with another picture. But it shows the bones, what wearing high heels does to the bones of your feet. This was in one of the books about shoes. This is the back of this magazine ad, so I covered it up with this small digital paper that I had. Some fabric there. Here is TaylorMade Journals wallpaper, one of hers. There's another shoe image, and I put it on a vellum that has a light grid pattern and some washi tape. This index card just has a piece of fuzzy ribbon on it. This is Amity Bloom. There's another page from The Wizard of Oz, and it was in the book about shoes. Both of the Wizard of Oz pages that I used were in the book about shoes, and you can see her shoes on the other side of the page. And there's the stamp. I love this pair of shoes, the high heel and the lace. It's covered in lace, and I love it with this rose. This just came out of a fashion magazine. This is another vintage wallpaper, wrapping paper, and it was used, so there were marks here where the tape had been, and I just covered it up with this embossed paper. There's a journaling spot for you. I added a little piece of this really pretty trim from Sheila Gingrich, Boho Daydreams. Here's another poem. Can't see the top. The top part of the poem is on the other side. But flat shoes, fat shoes, stump along like that shoes, wipe them on the mat shoes, that's the sort they'll buy. There's a journaling spot and a couple of doilies there that I layered up. This is vintage lace. And another piece of vintage stationery. And again, the vellum envelope with a digital journaling card in there. Choosing shoes. New shoes, red and pink and blue shoes. Tell me, what would you choose if they'd let us buy? Buckle shoes, bow shoes, pretty pointy toe shoes, strappy cappy low shoes. Let's have some to try. And then there's more on the other side, which we read part of. And there's another paper clip with a pretty red shoe. There's that wrapping paper, and I added a pocket here and a couple of cards that I had in my stash, a tag and a card that were already made and in my stash. This is from a vintage magazine, and a journaling card from Tsunami Rose. The journaling spot and the postcard. There's the other side of the Wizard of Oz book. And Amity Bloom wallpaper. Cut this out of a vintage magazine. This was left over from the fashion journals that I made recently. And this is just a tag that I had made, and it was in my stash. Ballerina shoes. And some wooden shoes. This one is from Tailor Made Journals wallpaper. This is a embossed wrapping paper. There's another pretty shoe that I cut out of one of my books, and you can see that fuzzy sort of ribbon with flowers on it. And then another tag that was in my stash. This is a digital rose tea card that I have in my shop. I have digital tea cards, or cigarette cards, in my shop. There's another piece of embroidered ribbon that came from Sheila. And a poem or an article, I can't remember which, a little essay about shoes that clatter. So there's some wooden shoes. Shoes on, shoes off. So it talks about customs of shoes in other countries. And this is a vintage Post-it note stationery piece. These are other shoes that clatter. I think they are wooden soled Japanese shoes. There's some So there's lots of things to read about shoes on those children's book pages. And the last paper clip made from a shoe image. And this is a piece of the wallpaper digital that got printed small. I think I did that. I've had these in my stash. I printed them a while ago. So I just folded it up to make it into a little journaling card. There's another piece similar to that. There's another pretty shoe cut out of my book, and some pretty vintage lace. This just has a piece of fabric and a die-cut butterfly. On the back page is a pocket and a couple pieces of fabric, and this came from my antique catalog. It's not a digital, it's actually cut from my catalog. And this is from a vintage magazine. And you can journal on the back. So there's lots of journaling space in this book, in both books actually. So I'll put how many pages there are and the dimensions and everything in the listings, but when this video goes up, I'm sorry, there's a little thread there. When the video goes up, these will already have been listed. So if they're not there when you go, it's because somebody bought them. So I hope you like these. These were really fun to make. And I already know what I'm going to make for my next project, but I have some tidying and organizing to do before I get to it. Let me just give you a hint. It involves these money bags from the Philadelphia Mint. That's all I'm telling you. They have a little bit of a pink cast to them. So I hope that you're intrigued by that, and I will see you in the next video. Have a creative day today. Bye-bye.